In this Photoshop tutorial, Photoshop animation tutorial, I'm going to show you transforms such as scale and rotation. These work differently to the previous video, movement and opacity, because the core information of that layer is changing. So, instead of changing position on a canvas, the actual layer itself is going to get bigger and smaller. And what happens, if I show an example, I'm going to make a new frame and rotate the layer. Double click it to put that in place, make a new frame and rotate that layer. What happens is if I go back to frame 1 and press play, nothing has changed because each time we're giving that layer new information and the frames can't understand that happening. So in fact we actually need to start treating this like traditional animation. So for every new frame you're going to have a new layer which has the performed transform on it. But I want to show you a little trick. So instead of making a new frame, making a new layer and transforming the object, I'm simply going to make a new layer. Sorry, someone outside is taking their bins in. And I'm going to perform the transform on that new layer. Now, depending how quick or slow you want a movement to happen is how much you perform that transform. So if I want this to go quickly, it's going to be quite a big, bold rotation. And if I want this to go quite slowly, I might do really small differences between each transform. So I'm just going to drop that back down. And what I'm essentially doing is having this egg rotate on the spot. So again, new layer. By the way, I'm using the shortcut of holding Alt and then dragging that layer on top of itself to create a new one. And then I'm performing the rotation on the new layer. So I'm just going to keep doing that until we have a complete rotation. So this also gives you the opportunity to have a little play with time. So I'm going to have this egg more slowly reach that kind of central pivotal point before tipping over that balancing point over to the other side. So in fact that might be a little bit too far for what I wanted. Give a little tweak. Who knows, we're going to have to test it at the end and see. So I'm going to start having that egg tip over. Just a heads up that the guides that I have put in place, I've just pulled out of my ruler to show me where I want that egg to always be touching that sort of scratchy little shadow I have down there. So I want, as it tips back over, to be a bigger, bolder and quicker movement back round again. Might even make that a little bit faster, so we're not all sat here forever waiting for me. So I've done a 180 and I'm going to get it back to the starting position as best as I can. And then when we watch it through, we can do a little bit of post-production. So getting back up to that tipping point where I like it to go a little bit more gently. So softly does it, tipping over the edge. I'm going to swing it back down now. A bit more of a dramatic. Roll and drop down. And now we're going to start trying to find that original starting point. And I think egg started somewhere around there. We shall find out though. Okay, so I've done my whole 360. All of my egg layers are currently on and I currently have one frame. Now I need to get all of these frames transferred, all of these layers transferred into frames. Instead of making a frame and turning all of the layers off apart from layer 2, I'm actually going to get Photoshop to do a little organization for me. So into that magic pre-flight menu, the 4 stack lines at the end of our timeline, and we're going to select make frames from layers. So it's even going to read our background and our shadow as frames, but that's a lot less editing than going through and turning each layer on and off as we make new frames. So when I select that, you can see that it's allocated a frame to each of our layers for that rotation. So first things first, we want that green background on all of our frames. So I'm going to just highlight them all holding shift and turn that background layer on and off. And same with my layer 1, which is that little shadow. And then we don't need these 2 blank frames at the beginning. So I'm going to highlight those 2 and use the delete or the the bin in my timeline, not in my layers panel. Now when I press play, I should have a nice little egg rolling on the spot. So we have a slight jig at the very end where that last frame actually tipples further than my first frame, and to make a nice smooth animation, I want it to loop seamlessly, so I'm just going to delete that last frame and see if it fits better. There we go, with the second from last frame. So now my animation is looping seamlessly and rotating on the spot. So that is the exact same process for scale. if I wanted to, let's say, manipulate that shadow, let's say it shrinks slightly in the next frame, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Alt, make a new layer on top. I'm going to shrink the shadow. And then I'm going to turn the previous shadow off behind it, leaving the shrunken shadow behind. And again, I'm going to use that previous layer that's already the shrunken version as an onion skin, which is an animation term. And what it means is it's like an indicator for the previous frame. So like we did when we rotated each egg over and over again, we were using the previous as an onion skin. So I just shrink that shadow even further, turning off that previous frame, like so. And instead of doing it over and over again, I'm just going to now utilize the new shadow frames I have by turning them on and off again. So I'm happy with that shadow, and as we start to shrink again, I'll start picking up, or as the egg starts to rotate up and the shadow would possibly get smaller, I'm going to start changing the shadow by the layers that I already have by turning them or activating and deactivating them frame by frame. So just remember, anything that is changing the core information of a layer needs to be duplicated, and the transform needs to happen on the new duplicate. And you're treating it as if it is a traditional frame animation where each frame has its own individual layer allocated to it. Very similar to what we did in the very first video with the textures. Great, I hope this was useful, and I hope that you enjoy using these processes on your next animation. Thank you.